Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants Hangout. My name's Joe Grabowski. I'll be your host for today. Today is another lesson in our Galapagos series, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome our guest for today, Sven Lindblad. So Sven was born in Switzerland. He traveled extensively with his father, Lars-Eric, who was a renowned adventure traveler and pioneer. In 1979, he launched what would eventually become Lindblad Expeditions, an innovative travel company offering marine-focused expeditions. He's been visiting the Galapagos since 1966, and today he's going to share with us some of his experiences and photographs from his many trips to the Galapagos. And he's had a long history in the Galapagos. Recently, a species of moth, an endemic moth, was named after Sven. Undulambia lindbladi, and that was in honor of the conservation work he's done throughout the archipelago. So, Sven, it is always great to connect with you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So, as some of the classrooms may know, I had the honor of being selected as a Grosvenor Teacher Fellow. So, along with other teachers from around North America, we were able to experience one of your expeditions and then bring our learning back to share with our classrooms, our communities, and other schools. So I guess my first question for you today is, why do you think a program like this is so important?
Well, clearly, I mean, more generally, I think that education is critically important, and helping to sort of develop programming in the school system as it relates to natural systems and such, I think is very important. I think that science and natural history and such, I think should be escalated in terms of curriculum. And so the idea of being able to take teachers out and provide them exposure to these places all over the world, whether it be the Arctic, the Antarctic, the Galapagos and elsewhere, I think gives them tools, provides inspiration, provides them with fodder that they can disseminate amongst their students.
Okay, and so the Galapagos, I mean, it's a place I've wanted to visit for as long as I can remember, as someone who loves science and studied biology in university. You've been visiting for decades now. Can you tell us a little bit about your first trip to the Galapagos, what you remember?
Well, I went with my father in 1966 when he brought the first travelers, non-scientists, if you will, or layman scientists, or citizen scientists to the Galapagos. I was 16 years old, and it was a somewhat different place at the time. The main town that you visited was nothing but a couple of huts and a couple of sandy roads. There were a few scientists walking around. There was the semblance of a national park. There was hardly anybody there. There were no particular rules, so we could go pretty much wherever we wanted to. And it was, I mean, I was just stunned because I had no idea that I'd been to places. I'd been to East Africa. I'd been to a variety of places, but I'd never seen anything like this, where all of a sudden you step ashore somewhere, you walk up very carefully to a bird that doesn't react whatsoever, and all of a sudden, I think that the biggest impression I got on that first trip, and reinforced on many subsequent ones, is that nothing's afraid of anything. It's totally a fearless place, and there's just wildlife everywhere: birds, tortoises, seals, sea lions. And the minute you dive into the water, I mean, there's so many fish, and at that time there were so many sharks that you could see penguins swimming underwater. So it was the most magical place I'd ever seen in my life.
Okay, I agree 100% with what you're saying. It was when you get there and you can get so close and see the animals interacting as if you're not even there. It's amazing to see that natural behavior like that, and that absence of fear. You've obviously been on many subsequent trips. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the changes you've seen in the Galapagos? Maybe
Sure.
Positive and negative.
Yeah, well, one thing I have to say right out of the gate is that in many ways Galapagos has not changed that much at all. on some levels. In other words, if I just woke up tomorrow and somebody cleared my brain, just like you clear a computer, and I landed in the Galapagos Islands, and the only remembrance I had, or the only experience I remembered, was when I was there in 1966, I probably would say that it wasn't particularly different. The populations of most of the animals are still there, strong. What I would notice is that there's a lot more humans there. There's a lot more activity there. The places, the towns and such, of which there are relatively few, but there are, way more people than there used to be. Certainly, when you go into the ocean, that's where you would see the most significant change. There are, although there still are a lot of fish, and it's a very rich system, there are certain kinds of fish which you just don't see as easily as you used to see them. There's just a lot less of them, in particular sharks. But something really, really very good happened about a year ago, which we can talk about later, that is going to hopefully reverse that again. By the way, kids, I hope you're not scared of sharks. There's really nothing to be scared about, provided you don't dangle bloody fish from your belt or anything like that. But it still has, interestingly enough, in parts, the largest biomass of sharks anywhere in the world. So, but if I think back to 1966, it was just explosive. I mean, you literally could get into the water in places and see hundreds of hammerhead sharks in several places. And that's different now.
Yeah, we just thinking back to our snorkeling off the boat, we saw some white tips, but we didn't see a lot of shark species. What caught my eye was the green sea turtles. There were sometimes 20 or more green sea turtles on some of the snorkeling, especially around Isabella. It was I'm a diver, so I've been in the water with 3 or 4 at a time. It's something else to be in the Galapagos with the sea turtles.
Yeah, they have a very healthy population of sea turtles.
All right.
When you think about it, 95%, just over 95% of all of the land in the Galapagos is national park. So there's plenty of places for them to lay their eggs without interference, because anyone who goes to those areas goes there in a controlled way. So it's probably, I would say it's probably the most significant paradise for sea turtles anywhere on the planet.
All right. Well, Sven, I know you pulled together a slideshow of some pictures you've taken in the Galapagos. I think now would be a good time to share some of them.
Sure. I'm always amazed how many buttons you have to press to do something. Oh my God, you haven't lost them, have you?
No.
Do I still see them?
Yeah. Well, you see, look at the short picture, and they see it.
Okay.
All right. We can see the tortoise.
So can you guys see that?
Yep.
All right. So the Galapagos, actually the name of the Galapagos is the giant tortoise. In Spanish, that's what the islands were named after. And this is one of only 2 places in the world where these guys exist. The other is in a remote part of the Indian Ocean. And which, they became, there were lots and lots of tortoises in the Galapagos Islands, but also once upon a time there were a lot more. Pirates and explorers used to come by, and they used to take these tortoises on board their ships. They could live a long time, and they were a source of food. The other animal here, or there are many animals here that are referred to as endemic. In other words, they exist nowhere else on Earth. And this is a marine iguana. And what happened at some point, land iguanas floated over, probably from continental South America, and they wound up in the islands. And then over time, they adapted, they changed. In the case of the marine iguana, there probably was more food available in the ocean. And so they changed from being a land-based animal over hundreds of thousands of years, or millions of years, to becoming a marine-based iguana. And so these guys, they go diving quite deep, in fact, and they can stay down for quite a long period of time, and they feed primarily on algae. And there is no iguana in the world like this. And that's one of the things that's unique about the Galapagos, this concept of endemism, which is uniqueness. Exists nowhere in the world, nowhere else in the world. When I first saw flamingos in the Galapagos, I was really quite surprised because it didn't seem like the kind of place they should exist. There's not a lot of them like there are in other parts of the world, but they sorry, I had a distraction from a telephone, but they are most beautiful, and these very shallow lakes on some of the islands. And that's where they go to feed. They feed on small crustaceans that, in fact, gives them this pink color. This is a creature called a golden ray. You don't see them that much, mostly in the mangrove lagoons, of which there are many. There's lots and lots of mangroves all along the shoreline of these islands, and those places are very, very rich in wildlife. And I was very fortunate one day to see this relatively large group of golden rays. I wish I could have jumped in the water right then with them, but I think they probably would have been frightened. The animal that I think people get most attracted to and really have a lot of fun with are sea lions. There are many, many, many sea lions on most of the islands. And they're very approachable. They show no fear whatsoever, which, by the way, it might be worth just saying that this is not because these animals are tame, like you would see them in a zoo. It's just they pretty much figured out that human beings they're not something they eat, and they're not something that causes them any damage or hurts them or hunts them or scares them in any way. So they just basically ignore you. Or in certain instances, particularly with the young ones, they like to engage with people. They'll come up and they'll crawl on top of you if you let them, which you shouldn't. But I remember once sleeping on a beach way back, and I woke up and there was this sea lion nuzzled in my arm, and it had just gone to sleep just with me. There are lots and lots and lots of different kinds of seabirds in the Galapagos. This one is, and they come out of their eggs, and they're very, very fluffy and generally white, and they are really quite helpless, and they get fed by their parents, of course, who go out to sea and then come back and give them food. This is a frigate bird, and the frigate bird is a very interesting creature because, first of all, it can't go into the water like other seabirds because it has a very, very, very large wingspan, and if it gets wet, they get too heavy and then they can't fly anymore. So they've developed a very interesting technique. They're highly acrobatic. They're called the pirates of the bird world by some. But they like to catch things like flying fish. How they do that is amazing. And what they really like to do is harass other birds that have caught fish. And then those birds, because they are so harassed, throw up. And then they catch what they've disgorged in midair. This is really the only natural predator in the islands, land-based predator, the Galapagos hawk. And so small birds are somewhat concerned about this animal, or this bird, and baby iguanas are quite concerned about this bird because they feed on them. Here is an adult frigate. This is a male, and so what they do is they'll sit on a nest, and then they will blow up this pouch, this bright red pouch, and then they'll shake their wings, and they'll make a lot of noise and shake their head, and basically try and make themselves as attractive as possible, as beautiful as possible, so that the females who are flying overhead will come join them in the nest. And it's really, really, really quite something to watch, particularly when you get into a place where there are a lot of them. Joe, did you see these?
We did on North Seymour. We saw quite a few of them, and a few of the males had their pouches fully inflated.
Yeah. And then sometimes you'll see them flying with their pouches inflated, and it's impossible to imagine how they do that, but they do. Joe and I were talking earlier about sea turtles. There are a lot of sea turtles in the Galapagos. In part, I think, because in a lot of places, sea turtle nests are raided for the eggs. A very, very small percentage of all sea turtle eggs, when they hatch, a very small percentage of the hatchlings wind up surviving to adulthood, because there's just lots of stuff that can happen to them between them. So they come out of the nest, usually at night, and then they immediately head down towards the sea. And there's just a variety of creatures that prey on them. Pelicans, the Galapagos hawk that I showed you, various fish, sharks, and then they migrate throughout the oceans, and then they come back when they're adults to lay their eggs in the same place that they were born, which is so interesting about how they figure that out, how they get back there, why they do that. But in the Galapagos, more than 95% of all of the land is protected. It's part of a national park. And so these nests are not raided. And so basically 100% of the eggs are intact and they hatch. And then they face all those other dangers. But in many, many other areas, they don't even get that chance. And sea turtles are just so much fun to snorkel with and to dive with. They're just beautiful creatures, agile, beautiful creatures. One of the things that people are really, really thrilled about in the Galapagos is swimming and snorkeling with sea lions. Because sea lions are, I kind of think of them almost like Labradors. I'm sure some of you have a lab or a golden retriever or some other dog, but they are very, very playful, and they're very, very curious. And so they often come up and swim up to you, blow bubbles in your face, sometimes nip at your flipper to try and engage you in one form or another. They're so much fun to be with. So one of the things that we do and others do when they go to the Galapagos is spend a lot of time snorkeling, because there is so much to see under the sea. This is an interesting bird. It's called a waved albatross. They're big birds. They have I think it's about a 15-foot wingspan, 12 to 15 feet, I think. And every year they go through this courtship ritual where they have these elaborate dances. I wish I could show you video, but the video doesn't seem to work on this system that we're using here. I'm sure that will develop and will get better over time. But and they're very affectionate and very nice to each other, and they live on one island in the Galapagos Islands, and they spend about half the year there, maybe a little bit more, and then they go out and they spend the rest of the time at sea fishing. And so half the time you could see them and half the time you can't. They're off elsewhere. Now, most northerly of all of the penguins, there are lots of different kinds of penguins. Most of them live in the Antarctic and in the sub-Antarctic, some along the South American coast. And this one, which is a really small penguin, some in Australia as well. This one is a pretty small penguin. There are not that many of them. They're not. They're only seen on a few of the islands, and it's just amazing to be in a tropical area on the equator and see penguins. And you can see them both on land, and of course, if you're lucky, when you're snorkeling, you can swim with them. This is, there are three different kinds of boobies. That's a seabird. They go out and they fish in the ocean, and then they nest on land, and they spend the nights on land in most instances. This is a blue-footed booby. There are lots of them all over the islands. They usually produce 2 chicks, as do the others. And they have a very interesting way of attracting a mate because they have these bright blue feet, and they display them in the most hilarious way. They shake them in the air. When they're on the ground, they do a dance, lifting one foot first and the other foot first, showing off their bright blue feet. Kind of a fun photograph. It's a marine iguana. What they do is, after they come out of the ocean where they were feeding, they spend a lot of time just basking in the sun, warming up their bodies. And on this particular occasion, I found one with a little lava lizard on its head. It's probably picking off bugs that are attracted to the little insects. And this is a convenient place to get a lot of insects with relative ease. There's a picture of the blue-footed booby. Showing off his beautiful blue feet. And on the left is the female who's just looking and deciding whether she thinks he is good looking enough. The picture, which I find quite beautiful, are these Sally Lightfoot crabs. In some places you can see them by the hundreds in the tide pools and on the lava on the edge of the sea. And they're funny because you can get to maybe within 5 feet of them, maybe 4, and they don't react at all. And the minute you cross the line, they just skitter, they run away, and they're really, really fast. Of course, the Galapagos is beautiful for swimming, although oddly enough, it's on the equator, but the water is relatively cold. It's not like the Caribbean or a lot of places some of you might have been. That's one of the reasons this ocean is so rich in sea life, because you get these cold water currents that come from South America and then come across and bathe the waters around the Galapagos Islands. So, most people, when they put their toes in the first time, are a little shocked. This is another one of the boobies. This is a red-footed booby, and that exists only on a couple of the islands. their body shapes are very similar between the red and the blue, and another one called the Nazca, but they have these distinct features. In the case of the red-footed booby, the feet, but also this beautiful light blue patch around the eyes. The Galapagos Islands are volcanic. There's lots of volcanoes, many of which are still active or semi-active. In other words, they could blow up at any moment. And these islands that have been uplifted out of the ocean. And it's really very, very dramatic. These are rugged islands. These are not like, I don't know if you guys have heard of Tahiti with just lots and lots of white sand beaches and palm trees and kind of very peaceful. These are islands that were born by fire. And there was a large volcanic eruption not too long ago that was spewing lava for quite some time into the ocean. This is just looking down into a sort of indentation in the lava, and the sea comes down through a passage and then blows up through this hole. This was an interesting moment. I can't remember exactly what this plant is called, but it's something that it's particularly what's called salt tolerant. It can tolerate a lot of salt. It doesn't need a lot of moisture, and at certain times of the year it gets bright red and orange, and it blankets a particular island, in this case an island called Plaza. This is a form of cactus. Cactuses are one of the first plants to colonize lava. You get a lava flow that comes out of a volcano. It kills all life in its path. It's completely barren. And then eventually life begins to form, or plant life begins to form on the lava and take root. But it has to be extremely hardy. This particular cactus is one of the hardiest. And at Punta Espinosa, Joe, I think you saw quite a number of these, didn't you? Are you still there?
Yeah, we saw some of these ones on Fernandina.
Yeah, Fernandina at Punta Espinosa. And they're really fun to photograph, particularly if you can get the light behind them a little bit. And it's just always amazing to me to see something growing out of barren lava. This is a photograph of the marine iguana feeding on algae. Darwin, he wanted to, when Charles Darwin was in the Galapagos, where he gathered a lot of information that eventually led to his theory of evolution, he wanted to see how long these guys could stay underwater. So he would catch one, not very difficult, tie a string to its body with a stone, and then another string so he could pull it up. Then he would throw the iguana into the water and wait a certain amount of time and pull it up to see if it was still alive. If it was, he'd do it a little bit longer and a little bit longer and a little bit longer until the iguana was dead. Not very nice, but in those days, science was conducted in a very simple and practical way. And that's how he learned that these iguana were able to stay underwater for really a long period of time. So as I was talking about earlier, these animals have no fear. This is a giant tortoise with two kids. You can sit quietly with them, and they don't move very fast. They're very, very slow. And if they get frightened, they pull their heads inside their shell. and make a kind of a hideous sound. And then once they relax, they'll come out of their shell. I guess that's where the expression comes from, come out of your shell, and carry on doing what they were doing before. Always with wildlife, it's a good idea to move slowly, to be very respectful of the animals. Don't get too close if you see that there's anything about that that scares them. This is the third of the boobies. This is called a Nazca Booby. And I just love this, the way it was just staring at me. And what's interesting about these three boobies, they have very different habits in terms of how they fish. The red-footed booby goes very far out to sea. The Nazca Booby is sort of a mid-range fisher, and the blue-footed booby stays fairly close in, so that they don't compete where they catch their food. How that happened is amazing, and it's just one of the things about the many things about the animal world that is just so interesting is how these different patterns develop. Now, this is a male sea lion with a female in the background. He doesn't have colorful feet or anything like that, but what he does do in order to make himself look strong and beautiful is he rises up like this, puffs out his chest, and makes some interesting noises. And what he's trying to do, I believe, is just make himself look as big as he possibly can. Here's another picture of a Nazca Booby coming into land. Now this is this is an interesting animal. You have this animal in various parts of the world. It's a heron. It's so interesting to watch them because they will stand on a lava, piece of lava close to the water, like a statue, for long periods of time, not moving at all, just waiting for a small fish to come out in front of them that they can then catch. Very patient. So every animal has a different technique in terms of how it gets its food. And that is it. I just wanted to give you a bit of a representation of different kinds of creatures. And Joe, we can have questions. We can have whatever you like at this point.
Absolutely. So, oh, there we go. You're hitting share screen. Perfect. Thank you so much, Sven. I love your photography. I got to see a lot of it all around the Endeavour when I was on the ship. And yeah, I mean, the pictures you take are beautiful. And I think you gave the kids a real good example of just what it's like to be in the Galapagos.
Thanks.
All right. Let's meet our first classroom. We have Mr. Richard's classroom. They are joining us from, let me just, oh, my computer's going slow. There we go. They're joining us from Amherst View, Ontario. They're a grade 6-7 class. And your microphone's on. Go ahead with the question for Sven.
Who has a question? Anybody have a question?
Hi.
Oh, go ahead, Kaylee. Yes.
How close did you get to the animals?
Did you get that?
The question was, how close did I get to the animals?
Yes.
Very. I mean, you try not to go closer than, let's say, 5 feet or so, but then 5-6 feet, but then they will often approach you. But very close. There's nowhere in the world where you can get as close to so many different birds and animals as you can in the Galapagos.
All right, so we'll go through each class once and we'll give a chance if anyone wants to pop up for an extra question. But we have Mrs. Faye's group joining us from Sudbury, Ontario, and they're a grade 2 classroom, and their microphone should be on now.
How many people?
You have to speak really loud.
How many people?
How are people?
How many people
Are trying to stop.
are trying to stop the turtles' eggs from getting eaten?
Did you understand that?
I think I did. How many people are trying to stop turtle eggs from being eaten?
Yeah, like how are they trying?
Yeah.
What can we do to help?
So all over the world, there are different projects that that want to prevent turtle eggs from being eaten in countries in Mexico, in the Caribbean, in Nicaragua, just in many, many, many different parts of the world. And one of the things that they do that's most effective is they identify where they are, and then they often put, because in some places there are animals too that will go and eat them, that will dig into the sand, and they don't have those animals in the Galapagos generally. So that what they'll do is in places where humans eat them or take them, they'll have people monitoring the nest sites, particularly at night, to make sure that nobody comes and eats them. And then the other thing that that happens in certain places is that there are local education programs that try and teach people that there's more value in allowing the turtles to live than to eating them. So there's lots and lots and lots of different programs around the world. You can kind of Google things like turtle conservation, and you'll see all kinds of different activities in different parts of the world. Did that answer your question?
All right. So let's visit our next classroom. We have, let's see, we'll go to Mr. Warkoch's room next. He's a grade 2 class. They're joining us from British Columbia, West Kelowna.
Hey, it's just British Columbia.
Hi, Sven. My grade 2s had to go out for lunch because we're on lunchtime now. But they did leave me a couple of questions. They wanted to know, one thing they wanted to know was, what is the coolest animal you've seen on the islands? That was their one question.
All right. So the question was, what is the coolest animal, from my perspective, in the island? And I just would have to say sea lions. I mean, I've probably taken more pictures of sea lions because I just can't resist. And every time I go back there, I scratch my head periodically. I say, why am I taking another picture of a sea lion? I have thousands and thousands of pictures of sea lions. But they're irresistible. They're funny. They're engaging. They're beautiful. And so I'd say that was the coolest animal.
I am with you there. One of my favorite things was snorkeling with the sea lions, the way they pop in front of you and somersaults, a ton of fun to swim with. So I can see why you enjoy taking pictures of them.
Yeah.
Our next class is joining us from Texas. We have Mrs. Hans's group from Austin, and they're grade 7s.
We're grade 8, but that's okay. Come on, Donna. Stand in front so he can see. Get in front of the camera. We gotta see you. There you go. Right here. Play me. Okay. Okay. Stop.
All right. So I heard, like, towards the beginning, he said that you had a species of moth named after you. How did it feel to, like, figure that, like, find out about that?
How did it feel to have a moth named after me? Is that the question?
Yes. Yes.
Oh,
and so maybe a little bit more about that experience, like why it was named after you, and then of course how that makes you feel. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was done by and it was given to me by the Grand Duke. This is pretty cool. The Grand Duke of Luxembourg in his palace, and I was really very, very surprised. And it was really, really cool. And I took my daughter with me as my sort of significant other. She was about, it was quite a while ago, she was about 9 at the time. And I was dressed in a tuxedo and she had a long dress on. It was a big ceremony and it was really super cool. They did that because of the work that we've done in conservation to try and support the, or not to try, to support the conservation efforts in the islands. And I was really, really very honored to receive that. It's a cute little moth. It's tiny. It's tiny.
Well, it's pretty darn cool to have a species named after you. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that was cool.
We have another group joining us from Oxnard, California, grade 6s, and I'll turn their microphone on. There we go.
Hi, guys. All right, there's an enthusiastic hand waver there.
Our question is, besides in the Galapagos, what has been the coolest place that you have gone to study animals?
Okay, the coolest place I've been to besides Antarctica. Well, this is the coolest place in 2 ways. Antarctica, in the very bottom of the world, the coldest place in the world. And I really, really love that place. It's so beautiful, huge mountains, massive icebergs, lots of penguins, whales, seals. But you have to, it's cool in 2 ways. Yeah.
All right, and our last group joining us is Mrs. Burkett's group in Sterling, Virginia. They're a grade 3 classroom, but I think they have other classrooms joining them as well today.
Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Have the behaviors of the penguins on the Galapagos Islands, are they different than any other penguins anywhere else?
That is a very, very interesting question. I'm trying to think. You know, penguins, I mean, I've seen a lot of different penguins in a lot of different parts of the world. And I would say probably for the Galapagos penguin seems to be a bit shyer. And I think part of that is you find them generally in smaller groups. Some of the penguins in the Antarctic are in huge quantities, and maybe they feel just safer being with a lot of others. I mean, they're not scared, but they're a little. You have to be really careful when you approach them.
Yeah, I noticed that same thing too. We only saw them briefly around Isabella, and they were one of the few animals that when we got close in the Zodiac, they actually split. They made a break for it and jumped right into the water. So they were tough to photograph.
Yeah, it also could be that they have, so that they have these two, you know, these 2 environments. When you see them on land, it's usually on the shoreline, and maybe they just feel more comfortable when they feel anything that concerns them being in the water.
All right, so it's going to be loud on my end for just a sec. My class is transitioning. But Sven, can you tell us a little bit about any invasive species that you've encountered in the Galapagos?
Oh, sure. Well, you know, that is the biggest threat, in my opinion, that the Galapagos faces. So you have more people coming, living there. You have more stuff coming to the islands. And so the key invasive species are either insects or plants. And then occasionally you have things like people bringing cats and they get released into the wild. I haven't seen them very much, but I have seen them on occasion. And so let's say you've got a population of wild cats in a place, they could completely destroy the bird populations rather quickly. So everybody that's involved in conservation in the Galapagos is constantly trying to figure out ways to avoid any form of invasive species, plant, insect, or animal.
All right, and maybe just to wrap up, one thing that we learned about while we were in the Galapagos is the involvement that Lindblad does have in conservation work. Is there a project in particular that maybe you want to speak to?
Well, we're constantly evolving and changing those projects. We've done a lot of work with invasive species, by the way, including goats and pigs, which are also invasive. You know, making sure that they are no longer there, shall we put it that way. We've done a lot of work with education, supporting an environmental school so that these kids can become the future leaders of Galapagos. We do work on sharks to try and figure out how to have less of them killed. We have supported a project related to reintroducing a bird called a mangrove finch into the wild. So we have a lot of different types of programs that we support.
All right. Well, Sven, thank you so much. We're getting to the end of the length of the Hangout for today, so I am going to give classrooms a chance who maybe have their periods ending a chance to duck out. But maybe after we go off air, do you have time to stick around for maybe a couple more questions off air?
Sure.
Awesome. So again, I want to thank you so much. The work that your father's done, the work you have done has been amazing to protect the Galapagos. And you can see it while you're there. You can see the impact that different projects are having, and you know, the way Lindblad brings tourists and kind of immerses them in the environment in a way to leave a small footprint is just phenomenal. So I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for the work you are doing and continue doing. And I'm going to turn the microphones on and let the classes say goodbye and thank you. And any that can stick around, we'll do some bonus questions.
All right.
All right, here come the microphones.
Say bye.
All right, thank you everybody. Ben, thank you so much. We're gonna go off air.